So we are here once again to finish up the remaining part of our presentation on the body fluid compartments and the concentration. So we have the extracellular compartment, as we have discussed before on the intracellular compartment. So the extracellular compartment you consider all fluids outside the cells that are collectively called extracellular fluid. So all sort of fluid that is within is without the cells, from the non-cytoplasmic fluid, are the one which we are discussing here, the extracellular fluid or compartment. So this amount contributes about 20% of the body weight, as we have said it earlier, 22% of the body weight, and is about 14 liter in a normal anatomical man of 70 kilograms. So it contributes 20% and is about 14 liter in a normal anatomical man of 70 kilograms. So this extracellular fluid is also divided. We have interstitial fluid compartment, which makes about over 3/4 of the extracellular fluid. That's the interstitial. About 3/4 of the extracellular fluid is from the interstitial fluid compartment. So this interstitial fluid is the fluid which is between the cells, the fluid that in which the cells get back into the intercellular the intercellular fluid, the fluid which is between the cells, or the one which cells are burst or they float on. This interstitial fluid which we are talking about, that contributes of about 3/4 of the extracellular fluid. So we also have plasma, blood plasma, which is also a compartment, the plasma fluid, which makes about 1/4 of the extracellular and contributes about 3 liters. We have discussed it. The plasma is a non-cellular part of the blood that communicates with the continuously with the interstitial fluid through pores of the capillary. So the plasma is the one which is found within the circulatory compartment, the circulatory system. So is the fluid, as we discussed it, the plasma is about 91 to 92% of its composition is made up of water, while the remaining 80 to 7% is made up of other constituents. So this plasma is found within the circulation, and is the one that communicates, it ensures communication between its system and the interstitial part, or the interstitial fluids, through the pores of the capillary membranes. So these pores are highly permeable to almost all solute in extracellular fluid except proteins. The pores are the ones that communicate to the plasma in the interstitial fluid, but they are permeable to all sorts of solute, but except of the protein, as we discussed it before, like plasma protein are non-permeable to capillary pores. Therefore, the composition of plasma in the interstitial fluid is almost the same, except for the concentration of protein, which is high in the plasma. So we have seen it here, because the pores are the one which communicates the interstitial in the plasma, the concentration is almost the same between the plasma and the interstitial fluid, but only the difference comes due to the presence of protein within the plasma. So we also have what we call transcellular fluid compartment. It's different from the interstitial fluid in the thought that transcellular is found within small compartment, like synovial fluid. The fluid which is found between the synovial joints, the joints, is what we call synovial fluid, but also the peritoneal fluid, the fluid which is found between the peritoneum or the peritoneal cavity, the fluid which is found within the pericardial cavity, intraocular fluid, the fluid which is found within the eye, also the cerebrospinal fluid. All these are considered to be transcellular fluid. They are not interstitial fluid, but they are transcellular fluid. As you can see, most of them are in the cavity, body cavities, like the peritoneal cavity, pericardial, but also organs like the ocular part and between the joints, which we call synovial fluid, but also the cerebrospinal fluid. So it is considered to be specialized. This transcellular are considered to be specialized type of extracellular fluid, although in some cases composition may differ markedly from that of the plasma and interstitial fluid. So the entire of this transcellular fluid are considered to be about 1 to 2 liters. So they are almost like plasma or interstitial fluid in terms of composition, but they are in some cases their composition also is different from that of the plasma and interstitial fluid. So different from the composition of plasma and the interstitial, the composition of the transcellular fluid and other plasma or interstitial are differently in comparison. But also we have lymph, which is the product from the interstitial fluid. So the interstitial fluid can, once they are secreted or poured into the lymphatic vessel, is what we call lymph, in which is circulated back into the circulatory system or blood. So interstitial or intracellular fluid, or what we call tissue fluid, bursts all the cells, as I said before. It bursts all the cells except outer layers of the skin. It's the medium in which there is a communication between the body cells and the blood. So it contains. So for the case of blood, it has some sort of differentiation. Like blood contains blood cells and also contains plasma. So within the blood cells, we call as the intracellular fluid, and those which is found within the plasma as the extracellular fluid. So it's considered to be a separate compartment because it's belonging to the circulatory system, but in their inclusion of the fluid composition, they are also considered that the fluid which is found within the blood cells and fluid which are found within the plasma. So the extracellular fluid, every body cell in contact with the ECF is directly dependent upon the composition of that fluid for this well-being. So the cells are all dependent on the extracellular fluid, and the dependency for the composition of that fluid for its well-being. Even slight change in composition or concentration can cause permanent damage, and any change is therefore resisted by the body through one or more oscillating control mechanisms. So you see that the cells, despite of difference in the intracellular fluid, or the cells, despite of their difference in the concentration with the extracellular fluid, the intracellular fluid depends in the extracellular fluid. And when it happens that the amount of the extracellular fluid or the constituency of the extracellular fluid differs, the cells also will also be affected. So we see that here homeostasis, the one which takes control ion concentration, control fluid amount concentration or composition or volume, and if it happens there is a deviation from any sort as a result of any cell pathology, it will harm the cells. So we see that here the cells, the markets of the concentration of the cells is the extracellular fluid, is the part where the cells can go and get whatever they need and select out whatever they need for their function. So if it happens this market is affected by any pathology, it will also affect the nearby cells. So for instance, we see here how it does that affect. If for that in case we say of calcium, we say calcium, if it happens that the calcium level from the plasma are interrupted or they fall, their fall will result to what we call tetany. Tetany is a spasmodic or abnormal muscle contraction or conversion, like what we call kukakamaa or kama degedege. That's what we call tetany. So this is a result of a drastic fall of plasma calcium or amount of calcium that will affect or will result to increase of excitability. The fall of calcium will also affect the concentration of sodium ions between the intercellular and the extracellular part, and the prolonged concentration of sodium ions will affect the will affect the specific cells. For instance, we say muscle cells, which will result to increase excitability of those muscle cells and the nerve tissue, presenting in form of tetany, or what we call spasmodic muscle contractions. So, but also we see here, if it happens that this amount of calcium is raised, that the amount of calcium within the blood, if it happens it raised, it will also affect the circulatory system, that the heart will be affected, whereby it will result to it will stop to pump or to stop to beat, and it will also affect the respiratory and other part of the circulatory and other system. So we see here, if calcium levels are distorted from their level, if it happens the amount of calcium from the plasma is high or low, we can see their effect within the body. So plasma is similar in concentration terms with interstitial fluid, and if the amount of interstitial fluid is low, the amount of calcium in interstitial fluid is low as compared to plasma, it also affects the nearby cells in which they are bathed with that fluid. So this is only for the case of calcium only, but all other sort of all parameters or constituents are all important, and you can see that if the homeostatic mechanism is poorly adjustable, it will affect their function, or it will affect the nearby cells. So how is the CF constituted of? They say that extracellular fluid includes plasma and interstitial fluid, of which the extracellular fluid includes the plasma and the interstitial fluid, as we said it before. So large amount of this fluid contains sodium and chloride, as we saw it before, like the sodium and chloride are much more in the extracellular and less more in the intracellular. So likewise here we see that sodium and chloride are much more in the extracellular and less more in the extracellular, and less more in intracellular fluid. Likewise for the case of element potassium, the magnesium and phosphate and calcium, which are less more in extracellular and much more in extracellular compartment. So after that we pass through this an additional discussion on the body fluid. How are they controlled, or how are they maintained? So how is this ionic composition of the interstitial fluid and the plasma are affecting the body fluids? So we come up with what we call Donan effect, which is all explaining the difference in the ionic composition from the plasma and interstitial fluid. How are they affecting the accumulation of the presence of fluid within this compartment? So we have the plasma protein. They say that the plasma protein have negative charge and therefore tend to bind cations such as sodium and potassium ion. So we have proteins within the plasma. These proteins have negative charge, and therefore due to this presence of negative charge, they have the tendency of getting bind to what we call the positive ion, the sodium and the potassium. So if it holds that, it means that extra amount of this cations, this plasma along with the plasma proteins. So the holding of these ions without no more holding of these ions within the plasma, and within the plasma as a result of the binding between this positive sodium ions with the negative part charge of this plasma protein. So the negative charge of ions, for the case of anions or the negative charge, which are repelled, tend to get highly selected or less concentration in the plasma fluid compared with the plasma, because of the negative charge of plasma protein repelled by the negative charge anions. So we have cations and anions. Anions are the negative charge, and cations are the protein are the positive charge. Plasma protein is negative charged. It means that it has a high amount of negative charge on its surface. So it's because it has a high amount of negative charge on its surface, it will tend to attract the opposite charge, the cations, the sodium and the potassium ions, toward itself. But also it will have a tendency of repelling an ion because it's negative charge. So any charge that is negative, for instance chloride ions, all sort of ions that are negative, will tend to be repelled out by this plasma protein. So this is all about the Donian effect, which describes the effect of plasma protein on ions and on an ion and cation, which makes the difference between the plasma and the interstitial fluid. But also, this is the composition in plasma, interstitial, and intercellular composition in terms of osmolarity, where you can see here ions and all sorts of concentration differ in terms of osmolarity between these compartments. So we have what we call stirring forces. Stirring forces are the forces that will enable us to know how is the fluid from the plasma gets into the interstitial fluid, and how does the fluid from the plasma gets into the interstitial fluid, and how does the fluid from the interstitial fluid get into the plasma. So from this stirring forces, the control mechanism for water exchange between plasma and interstitial fluid consists of 4 pressure. So we have what we call hydrostatic pressure, and we have what we call osmotic pressure. So there is hydrostatic pressure and osmotic pressure, which is found within the capillary membrane, and we have the hydrostatic pressure and the osmotic pressure, or what we call colloid osmotic pressure, which is found on the other side, or on the interstitial part of the compartment. So we have interstitial hydrostatic and colloidal osmotic pressure, and we have the blood or plasmic hydrostatic and colloid osmotic pressure. So the balance of these two, hydrostatic and osmotic pressure, cause a movement into the capillaries, and with that factor we call it stirring forces. So if these forces are balanced, as a result of their balance, there is that movement. They are in balance, so they are in balance, in equilibrium, with that movement of fluid from one compartment to another. And if they balance, it means the movement will no longer be between these parts. So you see how these stirring forces are, and what are the hydrostatic and osmotic pressure. So here we see that this is the blood capillary, or our blood vessel, in which you have the forces, the hydrostatic pressure that it has a tendency of pushing fluid away from the capillary or the blood vessel, and you have the interstitial hydrostatic pressure is also a tendency of pushing fluid into the blood capillary. But also we have what we call osmotic force or pressure, which tends to move into the capillaries as a result of presence of plasma protein, but also osmotic pressure, which tends to move fluid out of the plasma as a result of interstitial fluid protein concentration. We shall see how these 4 forces are guiding the movement of fluid from the plasma into interstitial space. So hydrostatic pressure is generated by pumping force of the heart as it pushes water of the capillaries. So that pressure generated from the heart, or the blood pressure, is the pressure that pushes water from the plasma or from the capillary, as we call hydrostatic pressure. The pressure as a result of water movement. So just like the way you push water in a pipe, in a pipe that is perforated with is much perforated, once you push water in that perforated pipe, the water will tend to follow or to pass into the side of weakness, or the perforated part, so that the fluid can get out. That's what we call hydrostatic pressure. For this case, it is generated by the heart, and it's the point of perforation, which for this case we say the capillary pores. So the water potential is created due to the inability of large solid to pass through the capillary walls. For this case, this build-up solute induces osmosis. So hydrostatic pressure is a result of the effect of the heart pumping, or how the effect of the blood pressure. But for the case of osmotic pressure, is a result of osmosis, potential difference between the solute in different compartment. If there is much more solute from within the capillary, then the fluid will tend to follow the side where there is much solute from the side where there is less solute. And if it happens that the interstitial part has more of solute, the fluid will tend to follow the side where it has more solute and from the side where it has less solute. So the water potential is all guided by the solute difference between the two compartments through the capillary walls. The osmotic pressure drives water back into vessel as water passes from high concentration outside of the vessel to a low concentration inside of the vessel in an attempt to reach equilibrium. So the balance between the two forces at a different point of the capillary. So these forces, the hydrostatic pressure and the osmotic pressure, they differ at a different point of the capillary, but they are guided by the imbalance of these two forces. And once the equilibrium is reached, we expect that fluid will not get out or get in from this part or compartment. So for this case, we see that the arterial part of the end vessel, the hydrostatic pressure is greater than the osmotic pressure. It's because here is where at the point we have much of pressure from the heart, so we expect that much fluid will be pushed from the plasma as compared to that osmotic pressure, or the pressure as a result of presence of solute, or for this case presence of the solute we are speaking as the proteins within the blood vessel. So at the arterial part of the blood vessel, we have high hydrostatic pressure, which will we counteract or overcome the osmotic pressure generated by the plasma protein. So as a result, there will be a net movement of fluid from the compartment into the interstitial fluid. But for the case of the venous end, we expect that there is less of the heart hydrostatic pressure from the heart, and there will be more of the osmotic pressure within the blood capillary as a result of presence of plasma protein, where we see that much fluid was out from the blood capillaries as a result of hydrostatic pressure, and more of solute there will be an increase of solute and a decrease in solvent, so that water at the venous end will tend now to follow the site where there is less concentration of water, or the site where there is high concentration of solute. So this, to prevent a buildup of tissue fluid surrounding the cell or tissue, the lymphatic system plays a part in transporting the tissue fluid. So the tissue can pass into the surrounding lymph vessel and eventually ends up rejoining the blood. So after that, we see that the equilibrium is not that much attained. So in order to return some of the amount of fluid which are being poured into the interstitial space, there will be a role of lymphatic system or lymphatic vessel, whereby the fluid will be taken to the lymph vessel as lymph and returned back into the circulation. So if it happens the lymphatic system is malfunction, or it happens there is any poor communication between the lymphatic system and the circulatory system, there will be a build-up of this interstitial fluid within the interstitial space, that swelling, or what we call edema, in which is gravity are affected. So here we see that, so that I can explain it clear, we see here we have this capillary, where we expect blood to move from this side to this side. We expect this here the arterial end, and this is the venous end, and here we have our capillary. So as blood approaches the capillary from the arterial end, there will be a much force of blood from the heart, which will tend to push fluid away from the capillary into the interstitial space, our interstitial space. So this fluid will be pushed as a result of hydrostatic pressure. But as the way it moves, the hydrostatic pressure also tend to decrease. So if it tend to decrease, it means that the interstitial fluid hydrostatic pressure from the interstitial space will tend to push fluid back into the capillary. We see here there was high hydrostatic pressure into the away from the capillary, but as the way blood tends to move, this pressure decreases. So the interstitial pressure, or pressure generated by water from the interstitial space, will tend to push water or fluid back into the capillary. But also we see that as the way fluid moves, we see that osmotic pressure due to plasma concentration. Here we have plasma. The plasma which is found within the blood or the capillary will tend to increase, because you see here fluid was lost and less of interstitial fluid was compensating, but the concentration of solute was increasing. So the result of increase of concentration of solute will tend to pull water, because there is much of solute and high of solvent here, will tend to pull water toward the side where there is high solute or there is less solvent, so that it will follow that gradient. So as the fluid moves, the osmotic forces also here we see, due to interstitial fluid protein concentration, will also tend to pull. But we also have the osmotic pressure. We also have plasma protein which are found within the interstitial space. So this osmotic pressure, as a result of plasma or as a result of protein found within the interstitial space, will tend to pull also some amount of fluid from the plasma. So we have the counterbalance forces here, where we have the hydrostatic pressure pulling, capillary hydrostatic pressure pushing water away, and then we have the capillary interstitial osmotic pressure pushing water into the interstitial space. But also we have interstitial fluid hydrostatic pressure that pulls water into the capillary, and we have osmotic force that pulls water into the capillary. So all these forces, they tend to balance, they have to attain a certain equilibrium level, but this is difficult to attain due to the continuous motion of blood. So what happens if there will be any buildup of extra fluid within the interstitial space? The lymphatic vessel now will have to take over to reduce the amount of fluid within the interstitial space and return it back into the circulation. So any defects that will affect the lymphatic vessel will result to a buildup of fluid here within the interstitial space and result to a swelling, or to call edema. So here we see that from this point we can see the connection now of the interstitial space, the blood circulation, or the circulatory system, the lymphatic system. It is here where we see we get our concentrations of the lymph, and it's where we will discuss more on the lymphatic system. So here is what will happen: filtration as a result of hydrostatic pressure through the pores. Here we have almost no movement, and here we have reabsorption as we discussed it before. So thank you for your attention. We will continue up with the remaining session